The myth of humanity. In the vast darkness of space, stories traveled faster than light. Tales of distant civilizations, strange worlds, and unimaginable battles echoed across star systems, whispered in hushed tones by traitor explorers and drifters. But among the myriad of stories, one stood out, a warning that echoed from the cold halls of the Zenny Trade Council to the shadowed corridors of pirate outposts. Never touch a human. No one knew exactly where this story had begun, but the one thing all the galaxy's inhabitants could agree on was that it had started with the Ken, a proud warrior species that had tried to conquer Earth decades ago. Their invasion fleet had arrived with confidence, armed with advanced plasma weapons and ships that could crush mountains. Their commanders had looked at the humans and scoffed. To them, the humans were weak, fragile-looking bodies that appeared primitive compared to the mighty Ken. But appearances were deceiving. On the third day of diplomatic talks, a Ken general, either out of curiosity or arrogance, reached out and touched a human diplomat during a meeting. That was the last mistake the Ken ever made. What followed was not a war, it was annihilation. Entire fleets vanished within days. The humans didn't retaliate with weapons. They fought with something far worse: raw, terrifying force of will. Their strategies were so precise that it felt as though they could read the enemy's thoughts, and their technology bent the very fabric of reality itself. The Ken Empire ceased to exist within a week, leaving only silence in their wake. Since then, the warning had spread across galaxies. Never touch a human. The myth of the humans had spread far and wide. No species, no matter how advanced, could afford to underestimate them. Captain Vissel of the Foreign Dominion had heard the stories, but he didn't believe them. A practical being, tall with slick obsidian skin and four cold, calculating eyes, Vissel prided himself on logical thinking. To him, myths were for fools and cowards. The humans were weak. Vissel sneered as his ship, the Obsidian Claw, approached the human trade vessel Starlight Venture. The humans had entered foreign-controlled space without permission, an insult in Vissel's eyes. This was his chance to prove that the ancient warnings were nothing but exaggerated legends spread by superstitious fools. The Obsidian Claw intercepted the human ship with ease. Magnetic clamps locked onto the vessel's hull, disabling any escape attempts. Vissel led his boarding party, clad in black armor with energy rifles ready, as they stormed through the airlock. The corridors of the Starlight Venture were quiet, eerily so. There was no resistance. The human crew stood still, their faces calm, offering no challenge. Vissel marched through the ship's metallic halls with authority. His footsteps echoed ominously, and his guards followed closely behind, weapons raised. He felt invincible. And then he saw her, the human captain. She stood alone on the bridge, a small woman with short, dark hair and sharp, steady eyes. She wore a simple uniform, her hands clasped behind her back. No fear showed on her face, just a calm acceptance. That irritated Vissel. "You dare trespass," Vissel growled, stepping closer, his voice low and menacing. "You should be terrified." The human captain didn't flinch. She met his gaze head-on. "We're here to trade, not fight," she said, her tone calm and matter-of-fact. "There's no need for violence." Vissel let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You humans hide behind words and diplomacy because you lack true power." The human captain remained unfazed, her eyes locked onto his, as if she saw right through him. "There's no need to escalate things," she said again. Her words were not a plea. They were an assertion, as if she were fully aware of the situation, but chose not to fear it. Vissel stepped forward, closer than before, his cold eyes narrowing. "What do you think? You think we're all talk?" He had read the stories, but he believed them to be nothing more than myth. He believed that no species in the galaxy could match the might of his dominion. The human captain didn't respond immediately. She simply continued to watch him with that calm, steady gaze. "I know the legends," she said after a pause. "And I know the truth. The universe does not understand us. It never has. Vessel's eyes flickered with uncertainty. You can't possibly believe you can take on the entire Thorn Dominion. Let alone me, he said, his voice rising slightly, trying to regain his confidence. The human captain smiled, not arrogantly, but with a quiet certainty. You think we need to fight you directly to win? Vesel froze. The words stung. The human captain's gaze shifted to the large. Before Vesel could respond, a loud explosion rocked the ship, followed by the sound of metallic grinding and violent shaking. The ship lurched beneath them, as though struck by an invisible hand. The walls shook violently, and the floor beneath their feet tilted. He instinctively reached for his weapon, but something was wrong. The Starlight Venture wasn't just under attack. It was being torn apart. "We've been boarded," one of his officers shouted in panic, pointing at the monitors. "Human forces are inside the ship." Vesel's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. He had the Starlight Venture under full control. His forces were ready, equipped, and well prepared for any resistance. How could they be overrun so quickly? "Impossible," he shouted. "This ship is fortified. They can't have breached it." But the captain didn't answer. Instead, she moved toward the door of the bridge, her footsteps purposeful and steady. Without hesitation, she turned to face Vesel one last time. "Your warriors won't be able to stop them," she said simply, her voice soft, but filled with an eerie finality. "They never do." Vesel's eyes widened as realization struck him with the force of a fist. He spun on his heel and looked to his crew. Panic had started to spread through the ranks. The human captain had activated something they hadn't anticipated. This wasn't a simple boarding. This was a calculated infiltration. The human crew had done far more than sit idly by. They had turned the tables in the most unexpected of ways. Before Vesel could respond, the doors of the bridge slammed open with a loud crash, and human soldiers, more than he had anticipated, rushed in. The gleaming armor they wore wasn't what Vesel had imagined. It wasn't the cold, metallic sheen of a standard warrior. It was sleek, light, and flexible, designed for speed and efficiency. The humans moved with precision, and in mere moments, his guards were disarmed. The humans were everywhere, but what shocked Vesel the most was their composure. There was no fear, no hesitation. They didn't rush in with reckless abandon. They moved with purpose, working as a unit with silent communication, their movements instinctual. They didn't need to think. They knew what to do. "How is this possible?" Vesel whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos unfolding around him. One of the human soldiers, a tall man with dark hair and an expression of steely resolve, stepped forward. He was unarmed, but his presence was enough to send a chill down Vesel's spine. "Your mistake," the soldier said, "was thinking that you could conquer us the way you conquer others. You underestimated humanity's greatest strength." Vesel's 4 eyes widened as realization fully dawned on him. It wasn't the humans' technology that made them dangerous. It wasn't their weapons or their ships. It was something far more terrifying. Their unity, their ability to adapt, and their unbreakable will to survive. "You were warned," the soldier continued, "but you didn't listen." Vesel tried to reach for his weapon, but before he could make a move, the human captain returned to the bridge, her expression unreadable. She glanced at the disarmed crew, her gaze unwavering. "I offered you a chance," she said simply. "You chose violence instead." Vesel stood motionless, his heart pounding in his chest. He had underestimated them. He had believed the stories to be myths, fables told by the weak, the scared. But now, faced with the full force of humanity's resolve, Vesel could see the truth. The humans were more than they seemed. They weren't just survivors. They weren't just fighters. They were something far more terrifying. They were knights, and the galaxy had never seen anything like them. The true nature of humanity. Vesel staggered back, feeling his heart race as the realization set in like a cold vise around his chest. The situation had shifted in an instant, And he could no longer deny the truth. The humans were far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. They had come prepared, not just with weapons or technology, but with an undeniable strength that no one had accounted for. His pride, his superiority complex, had clouded his judgment, and now he was facing the consequences. The human captain remained calm as she walked toward Wiesel, her eyes never leaving his. She seemed almost unfazed by the chaos unfolding around them. It was as if she expected this all along, like she had planned for every move he made before he even made it. She stopped just in front of him, her expression steady. "You've underestimated us," she said quietly, her voice devoid of malice, but thick with truth. "You thought we were weak. You thought you could break us, dominate us, just like you've done to so many others." Wiesel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His mind was racing, trying to understand how the situation had spiraled so quickly out of control. He had studied warfare. He had studied history. The Thorn Dominion had conquered hundreds of planets. They had subjugated species far more formidable than humans. Yet here he was, completely helpless. "You know," the captain continued, taking a step closer, "it's easy to think of humans as fragile when you look at us on the surface. We're small. We don't have the physical strength of your kind, and we certainly don't boast the kind of advanced weaponry you've come to expect from other species." She paused, her voice now a mere whisper. "But you've never had to face our will." The words hung in the air, almost palpable, as Wiesel tried to make sense of them. He had read the myths, the stories of human tenacity, their unyielding spirit, but those were just stories, myths. There was no way they could be real. But here, standing in the wreckage of his own ship, surrounded by his defeated crew, he had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. The humans had done something that no one else had ever done before. They had taken control of the situation without firing a single shot. Wiesel turned his gaze to the human soldiers who now stood in formation behind their captain. They were calm, poised, and collected, each one with an expression of unwavering focus. They weren't here for glory or for the spoils of war. They were here to ensure that humanity's place in the galaxy was respected, to make sure that no one ever doubted their strength again. "We fight differently," the captain said, as if reading his thoughts. "We don't fight because we want to prove something. We fight because we must. We fight because, when it comes down to it, we'll do whatever it takes to protect our own. And we never give up." Wiesel clenched his fists, his mind still struggling to process the reality of the situation. He had been trained to believe that strength came from power, from domination, from the ability to break others. But humanity, it seemed, had a different kind of strength, a strength that didn't rely on sheer force or violence. It was something deeper, something more terrifying. It was their will to endure. The human captain turned her back to him, her soldiers falling into step behind her. "Take him to the brig," she ordered. Two of her soldiers stepped forward, their movements swift and efficient. Wiesel didn't resist as they restrained him. His mind was elsewhere, trying to process what had just happened. He had been humiliated. His fleet, his crew, had been utterly defeated by a handful of humans. And now, as he was dragged away, he realized that this wasn't just a military defeat. It was a crushing blow to everything he had ever believed about power. As Wiesel was led through the corridors of the Starlight Venture, the weight of his failure began to settle in. How could he explain this to his superiors? How could he return to his people and admit that he had been bested by humans who had no right to challenge the Thorn Dominion? In the brig, Wiesel was thrown into a cell, the door slamming shut with a deafening clang. He sank to the floor, his mind reeling, his pride shattered. He had never been in a situation like this before. He had faced countless enemies, but none of them had ever made him feel so small, so powerless. The human captain's words echoed in his mind. "We fight because we must." It wasn't just about the battle. It wasn't just about who had the biggest ships or the deadliest weapons. It was about something much more profound, something that no species, including the Thorn Dominion, had ever truly understood about humanity. As Wiesel sat there in the darkness, staring at the cold, metallic walls of the cell, he realized that he had never truly understood what it meant to be human. He had underestimated their will to survive, their ability to adapt, and their unshakable belief in themselves. He had thought they were weak, but now, faced with the reality of his failure, Wiesel could see that the humans' true strength came not from their weapons, but from something far more powerful, their hearts. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the Starlight Venture, the human captain stood before the view screen, staring out into the void of space. Her soldiers were busy securing the ship, ensuring that every last threat was neutralized. The ship was quiet now, the chaos of the battle finally giving way to a calm, controlled silence. The captain took a deep breath, her fingers gently resting on the console in front of her. She knew that their victory here, while important, was only the beginning. The galaxy would have to learn a lesson, and humanity would be the one to teach it. The warning had been clear: never touch a human. But there was more to it than that. The true message, the one that would resonate across the stars, was this: humanity could not be defeated. Not by force, not by threats, and certainly not by fear. As the captain turned to leave the bridge, her eyes gleamed with a quiet resolve. This was just one battle in a much larger war, a war that humanity would win, not through destruction, but through their unyielding will to endure, to fight, and to survive. And the galaxy would never forget what it meant to challenge humanity.